Back at it today with another video, as today we're going to be looking at every MLB team's most underrated player. This was a tough video to make. There are a lot of underrated players across baseball, so I'm sure we're going to have plenty of disagreements with this one. Also, real quick, just want to let you guys know I'm not doing these in any order. I'm just going to be going team by team. So with that in mind, let's get right into the video. Starting off with the Arizona Diamondbacks, I have Christian Walker. Walker this year was one of the most underrated players in all of baseball, let alone the Diamondbacks. He played in 160 games in which he hit .242 to go along with 36 home runs, a 5.1 WAR, and he also had 17 defensive runs saved over at first base. He won a Gold Glove and also was one of the best power hitters in baseball, so I think he's the most underrated player on the Diamondbacks. Moving on to the Atlanta Braves, I have Kyle Wright. Wright quietly had a really good season this year, as in 180 innings pitched, he had 21 wins to go along with a 3.19 ERA and 174 strikeouts. Wright is all around a really good pitcher that I don't think quite gets enough recognition as he deserves. Moving on to the Baltimore Orioles, I have Jorge Mateo. Mateo this year played in 150 games in which he hit .221 to go along with 13 home runs, 35 stolen bases, and 14 defensive runs saved. He's not a great contact hitter, but the 35 stolen bases and 14 defensive runs saved is where I really think he stands out, and I think he is the most underrated Oriole. Getting on to the Red Sox, I have Xander Bogaerts. This was a tough one. There's not too many underrated players on the Red Sox, but I still think Bogaerts is pretty underrated. This year he played in 150 games in which he hit .307 to go along with 15 home runs, an .833 OPS, and a 5.7 WAR. When talking about the best shortstops, his name never seems to come up, and for that reason I really do think he still doesn't get talked about enough. Moving on to the Chicago Cubs, I have Nico Hoerner. Hoerner this year in 135 games hit .281 to go along with 10 home runs, 20 stolen bases, a 4.5 WAR, and had 10 defensive runs saved. He's a well-rounded player. He really doesn't do anything bad, and he does everything pretty good, so I just think he's a really good all-around player and doesn't get talked about quite enough. Next up, I have the Cincinnati Reds, where I'm going with Nick Lodolo. Lodolo, in his rookie campaign, pitched in 103 innings where he had a 3.66 ERA to go along with 131 strikeouts. He still has a lot of room to grow and is most likely going to develop throughout the next couple years as he was a rookie, but he has some of the best strikeout stuff already, and I think he's going to be a very good pitcher. Getting on to the Cleveland Guardians, I have Andres Gimenez. This was a tough one, as the Guardians have underrated players all across their roster, but Gimenez played like a superstar this year and he didn't get that treatment. He played in 146 games in which he hit .297 to go along with 17 home runs, 20 stolen bases, a 7.2 WAR, and 16 defensive runs saved. Gimenez is really good, but also really underrated. Moving on to the Colorado Rockies, I have Daniel Bard. Bard broke through this year, as in 60 innings he had 34 saves to go along with a 1.79 ERA. And what makes his numbers even more impressive is the fact that he pitched at Coors Field this season, which is notoriously known for being the best hitter's park in the league. So all in all, it was a very impressive season from Bard, who didn't really get mentioned in the media at all. Moving on to the Tigers, I have Gregory Soto. Soto this season in 60 innings locked down 30 saves to go along with a 3.28 ERA. He's not a really good closer, but I would say he's pretty solid. This was a tough one to pick. The Tigers were all around really bad this year, so it was hard to pick an underrated player. Getting on to the Houston Astros, I have Christian Javier. Javier this season in 149 innings posted a 2.54 ERA to go along with 194 strikeouts. He's pitched like an ace over the past couple years, and with how good his teammates are and especially the pitchers are around him, he just doesn't get nearly enough recognition. Next up is the Kansas City Royals, where I'm going with Brady Singer. Singer this season in 153 innings posted a 3.23 ERA to go along with 150 strikeouts. He broke through this year and pitched like an all-star, and being on the Royals, he's not going to get too much recognition, and I think he stood out as their most underrated player. Getting on to the Los Angeles Angels, I have Patrick Sandoval. Sandoval flies under the radar due to being on the same team as players like Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani. But that's to take nothing away from his talent, as in 149 innings this year he posted a 2.85 ERA. He's a really solid pitcher who I think has all-star caliber stuff. Moving on to the LA Dodgers, I have Tony Gonsolin. Gonsolin this year in 130 innings posted a 2.14 ERA. He gets overshadowed by pitchers in his rotation like Clayton Kershaw and Julio Urias, but he is all in all a really good pitcher, and he showed up this year. Getting onto the Miami Marlins, I have John Birdie. Birdie may not be an all-around great player, but he had 41 steals this year in only 102 games. I'm a big believer in stolen bases. I believe in taking the extra base. I think it can make a huge difference come season's end, and Birdie did exactly that this year. Getting on to the Milwaukee Brewers, I have Rowdy Tellez. Tellez, similar to Birdie, is really a one-dimensional player. He doesn't do much outside of hit home runs. He hit 35 of them this year, and I think any team in baseball would take that in their lineup, and I have him as the most underrated Brewer. Moving on to the Minnesota Twins, I have Luis Arraez. Arraez very quietly won the American League batting title this year, as in 144 games he hit .316 to go along with 8 home runs and a .795 OPS. He's probably the best pure hitter on the Twins and one of the best pure hitters in baseball, and he doesn't get quite the recognition he deserves. Moving on to the New York Mets, I have Jeff McNeil. McNeil won the batting title in the National League this year, as in 148 games he hit .326. With all the star power on the Mets roster, he really doesn't stand out too much, but he's definitely one of their more valuable players. Getting on to the New York Yankees, I have Luis Severino. Pretty tough to find an underrated player on the Yankees, but Severino stands out. He pitched especially well this year, and I think over the past couple years with all the injuries he's had to deal with, he has really flown under the radar, and this year he showed up. Next up, we have the Oakland A's, and I'm going with Sean Murphy. Murphy is a catcher that is pretty solid offensively. He has some pop in his bat, and he's also very good defensively. Put that together, and you have one of the best catchers in baseball. He's really just well-rounded, and I don't think a lot of people give him much attention because he plays for the A's. Getting on to the Philadelphia Phillies, I have Alec Bohm. Bohm this year played in 152 games in which he hit .280 to go along with 13 home runs. He's by no means a superstar. He's really not one of the better offensive players on Philadelphia, but I definitely think he flies under the radar. Moving on to the Pirates, I have David Bednar. Bednar this season in 52 innings locked down 19 saves to go along with a 2.69 ERA. He's a really valuable asset out of their bullpen. He can pitch multiple innings if you need him to, and I think he is the most underrated player on the Pirates. Getting on to the Padres, I have Ha-Seong Kim. Kim filled in for Fernando Tatis Jr. this year, and he did well, as in 150 games he hit .251 to go along with 11 home runs, 12 stolen bases, a 4.9 WAR, and 12 defensive runs saved. He's one of the more underrated players in baseball. I did not even realize he did this good before I looked up his numbers, so that really tells you all you need to know. Next up, I have the Giants, and I have Camilo Doval. Doval showed up in his rookie season, as in 68 innings he locked down 27 saves to go along with a 2.53 ERA. He was a very consistent and reliable closer for San Francisco this season, and I don't think he got nearly enough recognition. Moving on to the Mariners, I have George Kirby. In his rookie campaign, Kirby pitched in 130 innings in which he posted a 3.39 ERA. Being towards the back end of one of the best starting rotations in baseball means you're going to get overshadowed by a lot of your teammates, and unfortunately for Kirby, that was the case this year. Getting on to the St. Louis Cardinals, I have Miles Mikolas. Mikolas isn't really a flashy pitcher. He doesn't have wipeout stuff, and he doesn't really strike out a lot of players. And for those reasons, he's one of the more underrated players in baseball today, and far and away the most underrated Cardinal. Getting on to the Tampa Bay Rays, I have Randy Arozarena. This year, Arozarena posted one of the most quiet 20 home run, 30 stolen base seasons in Major League history. Absolutely no one talks about this guy, and he does play in a really small market in Tampa Bay, so you kind of have to expect that. Next up, we have the Texas Rangers, where I'm going with Adolis Garcia. Similar to Arozarena, Garcia posted a very quiet 25 home run, 25 stolen base season. The Rangers have a ton of underrated players, so this one was tough to pick, but I ultimately went with Garcia. I just never hear anything about him. Getting on to the Toronto Blue Jays, I have Teoscar Hernandez. Hernandez didn't necessarily play up to expectations this year, but going forward I think he's going to be much better, and I think he's one of the best power hitters in the game today. And finally, getting on to the Washington Nationals, I have Luke Voit. He is pretty one-dimensional. He only hits home runs similar to Rowdy Tellez, who I mentioned earlier, but again, I think anyone would take that power in their lineup. Alright, so that's going to wrap today's video up. Let me know what you guys think down below.